we should generally be training our isolation movements after our compound movements. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and yeah, I thought I would cover this again today. This is one of these topics that comes up so many times by people in comments and questions, partially due to some really strange traditions from the 80s that started and then kind of died out for the most part, that occasionally get brought back up, like pre-exhaustion. This is a very time-proven effective strategy that has actually been studied pretty heavily in the lab on top of it. And it's one of those where people will say, well, what if I want to do, let's say, my biceps before my chin-ups or pull-ups or rows or something like that, right? And my general response is, it has been historically proven for generations. People realize this even in the 50s and 60s, that it usually works better to do things the other way around. In other words, you do your big movements, then your smaller exercises, right? So your compound movements followed by your isolation movements. Examples you'll see just through this video, just some of the upper body stuff. You'll see me doing some chest pressing. Of course, I flat bench and incline. Followed by tricep work, right? You'll see chin-ups and barbell rows and then dumbbell curls afterwards. And that's the order I do those things in. Same thing, squats or leg presses before you do leg extensions. Now, you'll get people who will say, but, what about the opposite? What if we want the smaller muscle to grow more? And it's like, but it won't grow more. Okay, and pre-exhaustion has done extremely poorly in the lab. So when sets are done to where the big movement is done first, like a squat and then a leg extension. This one was studied early on. This was studied over 20 years ago to see what would gain more muscle. Due to some of the HIIT training that was out there and some of the pre-exhaustion supposed intensity techniques people come up with, they thought, well, maybe the quads will grow more as a result of that because they'll get pre-exhausted, right? The airplane flying over. I'm just going to keep rolling with it. I don't feel like cutting that out. But so that was studied, and guess what they found? The quads grew more from the other direction. And on top of that, not only did the quads grow more, but the other muscles grew dramatically more. So for the smaller muscle that was involved, it was a very tiny, tiny distinction, right? But what about the other muscles? The glutes, the adductors, like the glutes grew a lot more when they did it the other way. Right? And that's a desirable thing. And it makes sense. Why would you do a compound movement if you only want one muscle to grow? If you're going to do squats or leg presses, you obviously want your quads and glutes to grow. These are muscles we usually want to grow. Okay? And then people say, well, what if I wanted my quads to grow more? Then you would do quads afterwards. In other words, the muscle that you want the most growth from is the one you should isolate after. But you really don't want just one to grow. That's not a good thing from a muscle balance perspective. Okay? And hopefully people grasp that concept. But if you want to bias a muscle more, you could do a version of the big movement that works it more. Perfect example. My lats are much bigger than my biceps relative. I think everyone looking at me can see that. You can tell that I have big, massive lats. I don't have the best biceps. So what do you see me doing for back work? I do chin-ups instead of pull-ups now. I'm really good at pull-ups. The thing is, I'm just as strong at wide grip pull-ups as chin-ups. It's usually not the case. But, in my case, my lats are bigger than my biceps. You'll see me do underhand grip rows for the same reason, and then I do curls after. Okay? Makes sense. Pickup version does that. So if your quads need more work, just squat narrower and deeper. Get a deeper knee angle. Right? Your leg press, do them with a narrower stance. Toes more forward. Okay? There you go. That'll bias your quads a little more. And then do the extensions afterwards. So this is what's been found to be true in the lab. The same thing when upper body stuff was looked at. So if you look at some of the studies that were done about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, they were looking at tricep growth. Right? They were looking at tricep growth. And they found that the bench press and a lying tricep extension worked different parts of the triceps enough that they had a measurable difference in growth. Right, the extension grew the long head more, and the bench press grew the lateral head more. Well, that was interesting. So when they did individual studies, that's what they found. But then when they said, let's combine them together also in two other groups, right? So one group they bench press only, one group they did extensions only. They had another group to where they're like, let's do the bench first and then the tricep extensions after, and then let's try one to where we do it the other way. Let's do the extension first and the bench. What do you think happened? What group do you think saw the best tricep growth? I think it's very obvious. The bench followed by the extension had the best tricep growth out of all of them. It had better growth than the bench only. It had better than the extension only by a very small margin. And then it had the extension followed by the bench only. They grew more. And it makes sense because we're doing more work and we're doing the bigger movements first. And of course they found that obviously the bench press went up the most and the pecs grew the most. And they were about tied between the bench only and then the bench followed by the extension. So doing the extensions after actually didn't really even help the bench press, interestingly enough. Which, again, throws a wrench into a lot of powerlifting coaches who are like, oh, triceps, triceps, triceps. Well, in those novice lifters, that didn't actually work. But I digress back over to the point. What is it they're finding in all these studies for hypertrophy? We usually get the best overall muscle growth if we do a compound movement, and then we take our weakest link and we do the isolation movement afterwards. The pre-exhaustion doesn't cause as much growth. So in other words, the squat followed by the leg extension actually produced bigger quads than pre-exhausting by doing the leg extension and then the squat. It actually made the quads bigger with the added bonus of the glutes grew also. Okay? So again, this is our most efficient route for this. And bodybuilders figured this out decades ago. A really long time ago, they realized if we do our bigger exercises first, and then we come in and say, hey, what muscles really need to work? Because not every muscle in your body is going to need to be isolated, right? If your pecs suck, you should probably isolate your pecs. If your biceps suck, you should probably isolate your biceps, right? If your rear delts suck, maybe you should do those. If your hamstrings are lagging, you should probably train your hamstrings, right? This should be common sense. But not every muscle needs to be isolated. I would say even a worst case, maybe half of the muscles in your body need some isolation work, okay? Like for me personally at this time, I do a little side delt, I do some arms. I do my calves, I do my, quads, right? It's about half the muscles in my body. And that's usually what you're going to need, right? You can train your whole body with compounds, and then wherever your most lagging muscles are, the ones that really need the extra work, you come in and isolate them afterwards. This is a time-proven, real-world strategy that has worked for at least 70 years in the bodybuilding world, and for decades, it's been shown to be the most effective method in the lab also. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.